Well, good afternoon and welcome to the principal's office. I am Principal Edward Gordon. I'm so glad you have tuned in for this weekly broadcast where we'll be interviewing educational stakeholders who have made a significant impact for themselves, for others, and with others in education. In the book, Becoming a Person of Influence, written by Dr. John C. Maxwell, you will read that a person of influence has integrity with people, nurtures other people, has faith in people, listens to people, understands people, enlarges people, navigates for other people, connects with people, empowers people, and reproduces other influencers. Today, I am grateful to have a person that is truly an influencer who has and continues to make a significant impact in education, Mr. Daniel Gill. Good afternoon, Mr. Gill.
Good afternoon, Principal Gordon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you on the show this afternoon. So let's get started with a brief introduction of our guest today. Mr. Daniel Gill was born and raised in New York City. He graduated from Iona College with a BA in psychology. He served in VISTA, the National Peace Corps. During this time, he counseled young inmates at Rikers Island Prison. He attended Columbia University and graduated with a master's degree in urban education and curriculum. Mr. Gill came to the Montclair school system in Montclair, New Jersey in September of 1970. This is his 51st year teaching. He was part of the committee to redesign the middle schools of Montclair in order to desegregate the schools to comply with a court order. In 1984, he led the adoption of Glenfield as a peace site. In 1996, he coordinated the centennial of Glenfield School. In 2004, Mr. Gill and his students wrote a book on the history of Glenfield. It celebrated the Brown versus Board of Education ruling and its effect on desegregating the Montclair public schools. The focus of the book was to look at Glenfield as a microcosm of that decision. Mr. Gill has served in the Upward Bound program at Seton Hall University for 40 years. This program serves high school students from East Orange, Newark, and Irvington and provides them with academic and counseling services with the intent of getting them into a college or university upon graduation from high school. Mr. Gill was a recipient of the Robert Merrill Scholar Award from Cornell University and was awarded with the Euphemia Lofton Haynes Award from the Montclair NAACP. He is part of a recent documentary entitled The One That Got Away that dealt with one of his students and how he fell into the gang culture, his subsequent arrest and imprisonment. Mr. Gill is the proud father of three children, and he enjoys spending time with his six grandchildren and wife, Michelle, who has always provided him with support and encouragement. Help me welcome again to the show, Mr. Daniel Gill.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Gill, Dr. Howard Gardner, professor at Harvard University, stated stories constitute the single most powerful weapon in a leader's arsenal. Mr. Gill, what is your story?
I think I love that quote, by the way, because I think I've tried to live my life as a story. They say that at the in a journey, it's not the destination, but it's the journey itself. And what's really, I think, interesting about anyone's life is that the surprise of the twists and turns that it may take, the challenges you may have, the people you encounter, the successes that you have, the failures along the way, um, and all of those things become lessons, not consequences, but lessons about how you should comport yourself, how you should live, and how you should spend your time and how you should focus. So I would say that my life has been very, very lucky. I never thought I would become a teacher. I never even entertained the idea. And the interesting part about that is someone said to me, I think you'd make a really good teacher. And I guess one of the lessons of life is that some people see in you what you don't even see in yourself. And your ability to keep your ears open and your willingness to listen to other people is certainly very important in any journey along the way, and to at least try to do the things that other people see in you,
Mhm.
rather than to reject it out of sorts. So I think that my life has been one that's been twists and turns and ups and downs, but very fortunate to be in a place such as Montclair, New Jersey, and Seton Hall University, which are willing to accept the challenge of how to best educate our young people, both our general um, population, our special needs population, and certainly those kids who are underserved in our community. And so to be part of that and to be asked to be a participant in the planning and organization of that has been probably the best part of my journey.
Very good, very good. I'm glad that you were able to one be on the show and also to share your story with the audience. And I want to ask you, what excites you? What wakes you up in the morning?
Um, it's funny. Talking about my life journey, I was a big baseball player when I was young, and I was sure I was going to be the second baseman in the New York Mets. And about junior year, I realized I couldn't in my high school, I couldn't hit a curveball. So I had to change my career options. But I think that I've always faced life that way. It's like I can't wait for the challenge of each day where I have a group of young people sitting in front of me who probably are not buying into what I want to do. And that challenge is somewhat similar to somebody throwing me a curveball and seeing if I can hit it. That challenge each day is really terrific. And as you probably know, schools don't, your days are not linear, anything but linear. And each day is an adventure, which is also part of the wonder of the job. Some people don't like that, but I think that's what's cool because you're dealing with people. And so I think what excites me is the possible, whatever is that possible that day, and whatever I'm going to learn that day, and whatever I can help some young person find their way through life. So um, I really, I was telling the students, this is my 51st year, and I was telling them that I was thinking about my retirement and how I really don't want to retire, because I just get all my excitement out of being in that classroom and I was trying to figure out, well, how am I going to replace that in my life? So I'm working on that right now, that plan, because, unfortunately, retirement does come. But I think that's what excites me each day. It's the possible. And also working with younger teachers. I love doing that. That excites me because I really, as a member of this profession, I am very concerned about the young people coming up behind me, and to have the same experiences, to have the same positive feelings, to be affirmed for what they do, to hope that society will accept them. So that's another part of my excitement each day, is not just my students, but to help young people. And I just had a student teacher who was terrific and wonderful, and that kind of rejuvenated my juices as well, as their enthusiasm and their youthful exuberance also can be transferred to people who have been around as long as I have.
Very good. I love the fact that what wakes you up in the morning is the excitement of think about the possibilities of your students, but also for yourself in terms of that. Even now, at 51 years of teaching, about the possibilities of what you're learning uh,
Yeah,
every day. So that is just a lot of good advice, and also
right.
I love the energy that still comes out in terms of the work. And when you were talking about the opportunities to mentor younger teachers, work with younger teachers, and support them, especially student teachers that are coming to your school. I just reminded for me as a school leader, sometimes I have some challenges with the millennial generation and the new teachers.
Yeah.
Can you just talk to the audience a little bit about how do you approach a millennial and a student teacher and their ideas and their ways, um, to be able to support them? I'm just
Well,
interested about that.
I think, the one thing that occurs to me is they're not as well educated as we were, which saddens me. And I think because there's so many distractions today. I don't think that kids who are going through, or finishing up their student teaching, they have read enough about the profession. They've read enough to broaden their perspective and so on. And what they know, they do know technology very well, but I don't think that they know people as well. And I think they're more comfortable dealing with people through a text message or through a video or something to that effect than dealing with people in person. And of course, we're seeing that now with COVID about the fact that kids aren't coming back to school. So I, I, but I think what I emphasize with young people is the first thing that you have to do is you have to like kids. If you're going to be a teacher, I don't care how much you know, I don't care how much you don't know. If you can't connect with young people, then and you don't like kids, then you're in the wrong profession. And I've always found it in my own life that instead of teaching, first, establish relationships first, get to know your clientele. And one of the things I always tell the millennials that I think they can grasp is that, when I go to the CVS, by the time I leave the CVS, I have received an email from them asking me about my shopping experience. And the way I transfer that to teaching is the last thing we do, unfortunately, in schools is to ask students about what they think about their education, what they think about how well we're delivering that education. What are some of the things that they like? What are some of the things that they don't like? What are the things that could be improved and so on? And so I talk to them that way in hopes that they could connect the dots between their experience at CVS and their understanding of what makes you an effective teacher. Start with the student, listen to the students, get their feedback, and adjust as you go along. And the other problem with millennials is they want to be successful right away. And I tell them all the time, if you're successful right away, I'm going to really be angry because it took me a long time to figure this job out. and I keep on telling people, say, well, when are you going to retire? And I go, oh, when I get this right, that's when I'm going to retire. I feel like an artist. You want to add something to your repertoire each and every year. So I think that's probably my biggest thing that I would say to young people is you got to be patient. You're going to make mistakes, but most of all, you've got to know your students.
Very good. When you think about the professional development experiences that you've had, what would you say was a beneficial professional development experience that you definitely encourage teachers to actually go through that will be able to help them out in their career journey?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is we're in the job of learning, and sometimes we don't have enough training on how the brain works, and how important if you teach a discipline, how, for example, if you teach an academic discipline, how important art is, and how you need as an educator to include music and art and dance as much as you can, even if you're teaching math. As you well know, I mean, math is very, very much connected to that. So what you have to do is provide kids with opportunities to use both sides of their brain. So the training that I received on how people think and how the brain works, I found to be fascinating, and I very, very much I could apply to what I do each and every day. And very often that's my feedback from my students is that they're not necessarily excited by some of the academic things we do, but when I apply art to what I do, they really seem to feel that they can find their way into what I'm trying to teach better. So that was the best training I received, and then about how you ask questions. I think that was another workshop about the level of questions. Now everybody is pretty much on board with, asking questions that are on various levels and higher thinking levels and applying information and so on. But when I started teaching, Education was pretty much a very literal, job where people didn't really explore the what ifs. They didn't explore the what do you think. They didn't explore the inference side. They didn't explore the application side. I think I can think back to my own education. It took me a long time to realize that math led you to become an engineer. That sort of thing. So that those workshops that I received on how to ask better questions and conducting, I teach social studies, and conducting a conversation. I call them conversations with kids. Can lead to better understanding on the part of the students and better thinking, and also gives me better feedback as to what they can and cannot do and what I need to do in relation to that.
Very good. As you think about uh, literature and books, what is the most recent book that you have read, and how is that impacting your thinking today?
Well, there's two books, Becoming by Michelle Obama, and the Grant biography. I read history, the Grant biography. And what I love about reading about people is that you find yourself in them. You find that they're not just, let's say, gods or goddesses, something that they bleed, they laugh, they cry, they meet challenges, they get defeated, and so on. And Michelle Obama's book is so heartwarming because it's what we're supposed to be as a country. It's about opportunity. It's supposed to be about hard work leads to good things. It's also about when you become successful, that you give back, that you provide for others who are behind you, who are also, that you don't forget, your circumstances that you came from. And her story is just filled with all kinds of examples of that, and how I don't think they were ever awed by the fact that she eventually becomes the first lady. And by the way, she had to give up her law career, to do that job. But then she found her way into something that was productive. For example, the nutrition initiatives that she started, the garden that she planted, and you could see in her writing her joy in that, and doing that, and working with, and she loved working with kids. And you can see that she had a wonderful relationship with young people. She could establish that, and also how she lived her life. Her famous statement, when they go low, we go high. That's how you're supposed to live. You're not supposed to become like that. I tell my students all the time that when somebody bullies you and you bully back, or you bully somebody else, then the bully wins because you become like them. What you're supposed to do is you have to deal with the bully, but you don't want to become the bully in order to deal with them. And I think that's what part of her lesson. And then the Grant book has very similar themes, except it's a different century. But here's a man who, you know, uh, had great failure in business. Every business he ever tried, he failed. He struggled with alcoholism his whole life. But eventually, given the opportunity and the chance, he was very successful, even though there were so many naysayers, around him. And I think that's another quality that I think all of us would like to have, is the fact that we know, when we know what we need to do, is to not to be distanced or have our attention taken away from what we're supposed to do by people who are telling us that you can't do something, and so on. So his book is terrific. And one of the revealing things about him is that he actually bought he had one slave, and he bought his freedom with his own money when he had no money. He saved up this money. And then when he becomes president, how he really tried to see the, part of the Lincoln idea of Reconstruction, and try to really do it correctly, even though there were so many people around him. And the only thing that he was in his life was he was too trusting. He trusted people. Some of the people he trusted, unfortunately, were dishonest and let him down. But another example is he lost all his money in the stock market. And in order to pay back every single penny of his debt, he decided at the end of his life to write his own biography. Again, to be honorable. That's such an important thing. And sometimes we don't think about that anymore, but I think it's important. And another thing I tell my students, it's not when people are looking to be honest. It's not when people aren't looking. That's when if you do the right thing, then you are really honest. So there are so many wonderful lessons from so many of those, from those two books, from two obviously different perspectives, male, female, different centuries, different races, different circumstances, but yet part of the mosaic that makes this country, and something that we need to honor and appreciate, and understand, so that each and every one of us can be part of the mosaic of America and fulfill the dreams of so many people who depend on us.
Very good. I love the way for what you have been sharing in reference to these two books that you are reading, have read, and also how it's impacted your life and also your thinking. But I love how you're just taking it farther in terms of sharing the connections with your children, the students that you have currently, and that is good. It's not only about how these books and your reading is influencing your life and impacting your life, but what you can share from these stories to help others. And I'm glad that you're a person that does that and continuously shares and gives to others. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit more about Montclair, 1970.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as a student of a Montclair public school system, you can
Mm-hmm.
go through the schools and not know exactly what's going on in the
Mm-hmm.
community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're just a student going to classes and you just meet friends and others from other parts of the community, but you never know exactly what's happening behind the scenes. So just take us back a little bit. In 1970, Montclair, what was it like, and also the changes that had to happen in the school to have a greater impact.
Right. So I arrived in Montclair in 1970 from New York City. Um, and in part, I wanted to teach in Montclair because it was very much like New York City. It was a multi diverse society. And I didn't want to move into a cookie cutter suburban type community. And I actually didn't even want to move to suburbia. But in 1970, what happened in New York was that they went bankrupt. So I lost my teaching job. And the reason I wound up there was one of my professors from Columbia became the principal at Hillside School, which at that time was a K-8 school. So when I arrived, what I saw was a system that, although we had this idea that we were a multicultural community, really used schools as a way to reinforce for people the idea that some people have it and other people's don't, and shunted people aside and didn't provide the same opportunities to certain segments of our population. And also in the midst of a lawsuit, well, the end of a lawsuit, which was filed on the part of a group of parents at the school that I am currently at Glenfield School, uh, based on the Brown versus the Board of Education ruling of separate but equal. And what happened in our community, the South End at that time was predominantly African American, and the North End is predominantly white. There were neighborhood schools, and those schools in the poorer sections of town were neglected versus the schools that were in the more affluent neighborhoods. And the lawsuit distinctly said to Montclair, and when the ruling from the judge was that you have made your community uh, separate and unequal. And based on the 54 decision, you have to figure out a way to do it. And so when I arrived there in 70, the, the Board of Education had dragged its feet in trying to ameliorate this situation. And so what happened was they came up, it took them about 5 years to come up with a plan. And of course, what they came up with is something they thought wouldn't work. And I liken it always to 1973 when GM was told they had to put seatbelts in cars. What GM decided to do was they'll put seatbelts in the cars, but they didn't put any retractable seatbelts in the car. So that when people got in the cars, the seatbelts wouldn't retract. So sometimes you would slam the door and the seatbelt would be outside the car. So then people in 1973 would cut the seatbelts out of the car, because what GM was trying to say is, oh, you don't need seatbelts, blah, blah, blah. So that's what happens sometimes when it comes to race, when it comes to our country, when it comes to schools. Oh yeah, we'll fix it, and we'll make it so bad you want to go back to what we originally had. So what they did forced busing. It didn't work. I mean, it didn't work for a whole wide variety of reasons, because they didn't explain it well, because people don't want to put their kids on buses, because people didn't understand what was at the end of the bus ride, either black or white, and so on and so forth. So that failed. But what happened subsequently was that wasn't enough. The judge said, you got to come up with a new plan, and luckily we had a superintendent who believed in this new idea called magnet schools. And so he brought all the teachers together, and he said, the middle school teachers, there was 50 of us, during a spring break, we worked during a spring break. If you could dream, what kind of a school would you have? Isn't that great? That's what any educator would love, right? And so we all sat around and we came up with what we thought would make people want to put their kid on a bus. But that still wasn't good enough, because we had to convince, they were going to transfer myself and some other teachers to Glenfield, which was, again, South End, predominantly black. That school was about 90% black at that time. And not a bad school. It's just poorly maintained, and the teachers were great, but didn't have the facilities, let's say, the Mount Hebron, which is in the north end of town, which is predominantly white section. Anyway, we had to take on what we did was we did coffees at night. We did the old carousel slide projectors, and we showed people what our plan was. This is what we believe Glenfield can become, because we knew that the people that had to be convinced were people who were, going not terribly convinced about sending their kid to the South End. And so we were pretty successful. And I remember some people said to me, they said, Gill, this better work. It's my kid, And I said, yeah, I understand that. But as you probably know, if you work on something and you're given the opportunity to do it, you're going to really work hard to make sure it works, because you're invested in it. And so I went with a bunch of educators, and basically we came up with a magnet that did two specific things. Number one, here we go with the arts again. It was an arts magnet. So it was going to give a quality education in dance, music, theater, to kids, and art to kids. And then the other idea was that we're going to do schools within a school and create what we call houses, where the kids would have the same teachers for 3 years. And we felt that was very important because of the instability of adolescence and the fact that kids in middle school really needed stability. And by having the same teachers for 3 years and feeling part of a unit, that they would have a better success rate and a chance at success. And so those were the two main things, or other things as well. And we sold it, and then people were reluctant to get on the bus and to come. And I always tell the story about the first day. There was this white student who missed the bus. And I said to her, what's your name? And she said, blah, blah. I said, where do you live? And she told me, I said, here, get in the car. Because the last thing I wanted to hear from any parent was my kid went to that darn school and didn't get home that day, and drove that kid home. But we were successful enough, and we worked hard enough that the next year, the first year people were reluctant. We didn't have to do any coffees the next year, because people wanted to know, here you go again, what's at the end of the bus? Not so much what about the bus. So that's what we worked towards. But we still are working very hard, because we still have a gap. We still have kids on the lower economics who don't do as well in school as the kids who have means. And we've been struggling with that forever, like so many places have. And it still befuddles us. But one of the things that we've really said is we need to adopt some of the things that more successful charter schools do, and that is extend the school day, make sure those kids are safe, don't send them home at 3 o'clock because they've got nothing to go home to. provide them with the things that kids who have means have because their parents can afford it, whether it be music, dance, you know, and these kids really need counseling and help that way. So we're still struggling with how to maintain a school that actually engages and educates everybody equally and has equity. And that's been a big challenge, and hopefully we're going to get a more, out of this pandemic, we're going to see that better, that this is what we need to do. Like our school sometimes closes up and we have all of this stuff in the school, but because there's no programming, there's no availability to the local community, the kids, and they wind up in the playground. So, I keep kids all the time after school, and some kids never want to go home, and I don't blame them. So we have to recognize that. I think mentoring programs, again, charter schools do mentoring programs, and then field trips, take kids places. They have to extend their horizons. My kids, some of my kids who are on that in that gap, they've their whole life is 4 square blocks. They've
Mhm.
never even been to Upper Montclair. I'll put them in a car and drive them up, and I say, Mr. Gill, what town are we in? And this is like really something that people don't recognize, that how important that is externally from an education in the sense of a public education, but it's really such an important, so those kids can see that there's a world bigger than the world that they know. So those are that's where we were. We've done very well, but we've not done well enough to close that gap. And the other thing is how we measure the gap is something that we could talk forever about.
Understood.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that the story of Montclair, what the changes and transformation happened back in the 70s. Again, for me as a student of Montclair Public Schools and going to Glenfield, didn't understand what was happening within the community, and the conversations were happening amongst educators and superintendents and so forth. But it's also interesting uh, for me as a middle school principal for several years. I went to a situation and I had to really do a lot of education for the teachers and staff about effective middle schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a student in Glenfield Middle School, but I always went back and thought about what was happening when I was in middle school. And like you said, breaking down that larger middle school to the smaller houses
Mm-hmm.
and having a team of teachers that are with you and stay with you for that time period. Yes, like you mentioned, the adolescents and middle school students, the changes that they go through socially and emotionally, but having that understanding that I belong, I'm here. There's a set of teachers that are going to be with me during this journey. Some days I'm going to come in as a middle school student and I'm going to be crying.
Mm-hmm.
Some days I can
I know.
fight and be tough. Okay, those emotions that go through. But it's so good to have that family of support that's consistent with you for that sixth, seventh, eighth grade. And also, you mentioned about the magnet schools and the incorporation of the arts, and that was definitely beneficial for me,
Yeah.
being a part of the music program with Mr. John Best, and
Yeah.
then going to Mockville High School. And for me, that gave me the foundation to start off my career, go to the University of South Carolina and be a music teacher in Patterson Public Schools. So all of that has definitely was beneficial for me and many others. And another thing that you mentioned is about the fact of public schools. Yes, you have the traditional publics, and you charter schools are also public schools as well.
Right.
And what we should be looking at is best practices,
Yep.
okay, from
Yep.
wherever they are, what other states are doing, what's happening internationally. What's those best practices that are in the best interest of the students, and take those ideas and those concepts and be willing to, in a safe environment, put them in place to work towards closing not only the achievement gap that everybody talks about, but
Right.
also those opportunity gaps.
Yeah.
And that is really key that we continuously work through. And we just hope that I know that the audience, there's many teachers, superintendents, and principals that are watching the show. That is the type of opening thinking that we need
Yep.
to make a lasting impact. So I'm
Yep.
definitely grateful that you're able to share the story of Montclair and also where they are today. And all districts still have ways to go in
Yep.
making it the best for our students.
Yeah, I agree. But that's what we need to do, and we need to constantly think outside the box.
Yes.
You know, you got, and you got to honor. When young people come in, the thing that I was talking about is I, when I went to Columbia, they told me I was a decision maker. So when I came to Montclair and they said, "Okay, you're going to do this," I go, "Wait a minute." And remember, I'm a 60s kid. Vietnam War, riots, and all that stuff. So I'm going like, whoa, why don't you explain it to me? And as you went along, you would say, well, what about this? Or what about, and then I was lucky enough then to have a leadership that shared their vision that we can be better. And maybe these are some of the things we can do, but I'm really interested in what the people who are going to execute this, think about this and whether you think that there are better things to do. What I'm afraid of is that young people don't have that sense. It's more about, here, we're going to make this profession teacher proof. We're going to do this book, and you need to be on this page on October the 14th. And if you're not, you're in trouble. Rather than for you to understand that your students should direct you, that yes, there are objectives that you have to accomplish, but there are so many ways that you can do it, besides being on that page October the 14th.
Yes.
So I would hope that young people would be encouraged that yes, they're not just people who are going to school being told what to do, but that they're part of the dynamic of that school, and that they can see as they grow as professionals how they can make that school better.
Very good. Yes, I'm always given the ask the question, like who's in charge of that classroom, who's in charge of that school. And for me, my answer has always been the students. Okay, what they come in with, their needs, that's going to direct what's happening when I teach in that classroom that particular day. It might be different the next day, but where the students are, that is really important. And also, like you mentioned, creating opportunities where they can express how they feel about the school, the environment, and also their ideas,
Right.
and they have that sense of ownership. That is where, when they feel that they belong and have a sense of ownership, that's where the academics and everything else is going to take off. Okay, and then that's something that we all have to understand as educators. And I do agree, it's not always about the fact that we have to be on page 15 by September 28th, but it's about the whole student, whole child, and everything that comes along with education. So
And
that is
it's
good,
the
important.
simple use of pronouns. It's not I, it's we
We.
in the classroom. We're going to do this. Not I, Mr. Gill, is going to do this, or you're going to do. We're going to do this. And I think that just as a mindset, we're in this together. We're not, on certain tiers and difference. Yeah. So what you say is absolutely true. And that's a thriving school. And that's a school that will grow consistently and won't rest on its laurels saying, back in, 2010, we really, were the number one school, but you can't do the same thing in 2021 that you did in 2010. It doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And now, with everything that's happened over the last year and a year and a half and so forth with the pandemic,
Oh my God.
I tell principals that I'm mentoring and coaching, if our vision is still the same years ago, if this last year and a half hasn't changed the way we think about our school visions as well as our mission and how we are educating our students, then we have a problem. So we definitely have to make the adjustments.
Right.
Let me just ask you a question about. I know that you have been a mentor to many. Okay, do you have a mentor in your life that has impacted
Oh,
your career?
yeah. I think that my main mentors were when I were young. Obviously, you have big mentors. Frank Rennie was a principal of in Montclair for many years, and who, when we redesigned the Glenfield School itself, he was our principal. But he was my first principal, and you know what the mentorship was about? It was about establishing a personal relationship. There you go. It wasn't about I'm going to teach you how to teach. It was simply about I'm going to support what you do. I'm going to help you through your tough times. I'm going to give you suggestions. I'm going to listen to what you think you need, and I'm going to try to provide for you the things that that you need that would make you more successful, or make your students obviously more successful. And then another mentor I had was at Seton Hall University, and he was a person who thought outside the box. And he was constantly saying, "Okay, we have these kids who are first generation, um, and mostly under the poverty level. And what are we going to do with kids like that in a summer program, and which continues as like a Saturday program with Upward Bound? And what are we going to do, and how are we going to get those kids out of their mindset and into the mindset of the possible?" And so he was a tremendous mentor. And what he taught me was to be open to all ideas, to be patient, and not to look at failure as a terrible thing, but to look at failure, if you tried something and it didn't work, um, as something to be, something that you learn from, and not to then point fingers at who caused this or what. He wasn't that kind of a mentor, and he was my boss, but the one thing I guess I tell young people all the time is, I hate to tell you this, but kids watch you all the time. You don't think they're paying attention, but they watch you like a hawk. And they're going to see how you deal with anger, how you deal with frustration, how you deal with success, whether you laugh at yourself or not, um, whether you admit to mistakes. They're going to watch that. And you may not think they are. And the reason I know is because kids will always tell me about those. When I say, what do you remember? They'll tell me about, I remember the time, Mr. Gill, you bent over and you split your pants. And I remember about the Constitution. No, I don't remember. But Mr. Gill, you laughed at yourself when you split your pants. And which is a lesson, right? And you don't even know you're giving it. And so what did Maya Angelou say? It's not so much what you do, it's how it's about how you make people feel.
Mm-hmm.
If you make people feel, one of the things that adolescents are, they're not comfortable in their own skin, and you have to just accept them for who they are, and and they need to be talked with all the time. And I tried to I learned from one mentor this: try to talk to every student personally once a week. I keep a list and I check off.
Good.
Have a conversation, and I hope that I have something positive to say based on their behavior, or based on what I've observed, or based on something they did academically, so that I can accentuate for them, you are being appreciated as a human being, and you're just fine. You're just fine. And I can't tell you, when you just do that, their faces light up. It's like the greatest gift that you've ever given them. So I would say that probably, from my mentors, they taught me again about this personal touch. The personal relationship is the most important thing.
Very good. I would tell you, I had to go back and count my years of schooling when you were my teacher, and I believe now my calculations are correct. I was
Nice.
at Glenfield from 1987 to 1990.
Yep.
And many times when you go to professional development experiences as an educator, as a principal, and I also volunteered to be a coach with the Dale Carnegie program. And some activities you have is like, who was that teacher that influenced you? And I would tell you that it's an easy story for me, and it's always about you.
Oh, that's
And
right.
I'm going to tell you two examples and lessons I learned from you, and I still remember today.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so one lesson back in the late 80s, 87 to 90, I can't remember the exact year, but it was an activity that we had to write a letter to the presidential candidates. And at that time, I decided to write a letter to Ross Perot.
Okay.
Okay, so I wrote a letter. After we wrote the letter, we put it in the envelope, we addressed it, and we're going to send it out to his campaign. But before we sent it out, you told me and also everyone else, we have to do something different about our envelopes. Okay, so that they get so many envelopes, thousands of letters, but what is going to have make a difference that they're going to read yours? So Ross Perot was big on the bow ties, so I decorated the envelope. Goes in with the art and everything else, a bunch
Right.
of bow ties on the letter. The letter was sent out, and it came back with a response from Ross Perot in the campaign. But the one lesson that you taught me there is that we have to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can wherever we are, if we're still
Yeah.
students in school, going to college, in our careers, you have to do something to stand out, and that was as a lesson that is still
Wow.
lasting with me today. The
Wow.
second lesson, in the statement that you said, and it goes back to what you were just saying about these personal conversations, and you were doing it back then, and the fact that I guess you were grading a paper of mine or something, and we had this one-on-one conversation. But you told me that one day I will read about you in the paper,
Mm-hmm.
and that stuck with me. The fact that you believed in me,
Mm-hmm.
you had faith in me, and I would say, for myself, I know, and for the thousands of other students that you influence, I am definitely grateful.
Oh yeah.
We are grateful,
Yeah.
and you will never know and understand the impact that you have had on not only the students that have come through the Glenville School and your classrooms, but what you have modeled for us. We are influencing others based on what you have done for us and believing in us, having faith in us. And I am just grateful. I'm thankful for your opportunity for you to be on the show this afternoon. And as we close out our time together, what is one piece of advice or words of wisdom that you would like to share with the audience before we close out for this afternoon?
Believe in public education. That don't let the naysayers tell you that it doesn't work. We have to do a better job. Just everybody has to do a better job. But all our institutions need your support, and especially the young teachers who are starting out need your support and your backing. And you know, teachers are going to make mistakes. Teachers are going to do things that maybe you don't agree with. But if you find a teacher that you think has done a good thing, let them know, because when you're young, sometimes you're just toiling in a vineyard, and you don't know, whether you're picking the grapes right or not. And it does help, especially in the day of emails, just to say, "Hey, Mr. Gill, my son came home yesterday and he talked about the lesson. Good job." And I think that if you do that, and to support public education and be involved, and that's another thing. You just be involved in your child's education, and know what your kid's doing, and know that people are not trying to hurt your kid, but sometimes they have to be reminded of maybe they need to do something better.
Yes, very good. Well, again, Mr. Gill, thank you for being on the show this afternoon. Thank you for modeling excellence for your school community. And for everyone watching this broadcast, thank you for tuning in to the principal's office. And join us next week on Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another episode with an amazing educator that has done things significantly for themselves, for others, and with others in education. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.